Hello and welcome back to the Q&A portion of the presentation of Her Name Was Europa. I have the filmmakers with us, Anja Dornieden and Juan David González Monroy. So Anja and Juan, I wondered if you could begin by speaking a bit about Ohoboka. I know that this is a phrase by Pasolini that referred to the camera as the eye mouth. And so I just wondered if you could speak a bit about this collaboration between the two of you, and also was curious about the aurorism, which I think you've spoken about in relation to your practice.
Yeah, well, the Ohoboka thing, it sort of happened because we needed to actually find, we were looking for funding and we needed to present a sort of production company, and we didn't have one, but there was the chance of us making something. So they were like, it needs a name. So it was kind of haphazard, like, okay, what do we call this thing? We had just started making films together. So then we stumble on this name, this sort of definition of this sort of eye that speaks, kind of Ohoboka from Spanish, or I guess in Italian it also made sense, it translated. So that kind of, we liked the idea of that. And afterwards it kind of became this name we used for the work we did together. So in that sense, and I guess we liked it because it kind of leaves a lot of interpretation to what it can mean, what happens with this speaking eye, but other people like see it as sort of like, if it's like an eye that's also speaking, but also maybe swallowing or eating, or I don't know, there's different like sort of ways you can interpret it, this idea of an eye mouth.
Yeah, and I guess also like people, like often we've been asked like, oh, who does what, or who's influencing and who's part, but actually usually when we work together, we don't really differentiate these roles that much. Also when we shoot or when we later in editing, of course there's certain parts that we divide, but later on we never really quite sure who did what, or it's not really that important anymore. And so yeah, also we like this idea that like, oh yeah, who's the one who see or who speaks, or to play around with different perceptions.
Since there's two of us, and then in between us there's the sort of the camera in between the machine and the equipment, it was interesting for us to play with that idea that the author itself, like the one author or the one point of view, kind of gets lost there. So you don't have this thing of, oh, who's talking to me? And that speaks to this idea of horrorism that came sort of also from us thinking, because we work with analog film pretty much exclusively, we make prints, we like to show the films when possible. Right now it's not exactly possible, but on film. And we were trying to think of what is it about that process that appeals to us, and why are we doing it when this sort of mainstream was moving into this digital environment. And then it became to us kind of about thinking about what happens when you have film, analog film, and what happens when you have the sort of ritual of cinema, and what kind of experience that creates. And what we started to notice was the whole experience, from like shooting to projecting to sitting in the theater, there's a sort of kind of uncertain aspect to it. There's like a risk there, and it creates a sort of special, I don't know, some kind of sensation in us and in the viewers when we think it works, and you can explore a sort of kind of, let's say, some sort of unconscious experience. And there's a sort of like discomfort to that, like some sort of kind of abyss that opens up for the viewer when you don't really know what's happening, what's going on. Is this going to work? Is it not going to work? Will the film break? Will the projector break? And that kind of became this idea of working towards this ritual of cinema, what we started to call horrorism.
Well, maybe also in this film, the voice or the narration, there's not often we work with a voice, but in this film you have the intertitles. It is maybe a little bit more straightforward than other works we've done. But this sensation of uncertainty we really like to have this guidance by be intertitled or voice, and have the viewer kind of be guided into this uncertain territory. And what it then does to the viewer, like, are you comfortable with it or are you not comfortable? Why are you not uncomfortable? So this is often like a theme that we play with.
Yeah, thanks. I was kind of jumping into the content of the film now. I found that the film draws a really interesting line between the histories of different groups of people and their relationship to the Auroch, and it, kind of conveys to us this kind of European national impulse, also kind of like echoes of geneticist ambitions. But I find it really fascinating how we're seeing this rather than through an anthropocentric lens, which we're used to. We're seeing this as these ideologies are applied to a different species. But I think it's, very clear what the thinking is behind a lot of these projects. So I just wondered if you could talk a bit about kind of these kind of political, ideological things that are kind of within these histories.
Yeah, I mean on the one side, that was kind of one of the first things that drew us to it, was the fact that the Heck brothers had been supported by the Nazis to carry out these experiments in the Berlin and the Munich zoos, to basically take this animal, which they saw as a sort of symbol of what once was like the European wildness, this sort of idealized version of nature, and bring it back as part of like this massive project that they had, in every angle, in every aspect of society in a way. So it would make sense that they would also have some sort of vision of what the natural world should be. And kind of doing that research was the beginning, like we said in the intro, of seeing like, oh, this was this project, and the animals that came out of this project, which the Heck brothers saw as a success, basically. They said, oh, they worked on this for for some years, some decades, and then they said, oh, we did it. The animal we have here, this is the Aurochs, it's back, which was false. Like, they hadn't really created anything that could be considered the real Aurochs, and today those animals are not considered a success or even a copy of the animal. And this is what was interesting to us, that the descendants were around. You could see them, you could go, mm-hmm. And they still exist, and now they're called Heck cattle, like we said. And that was kind of the starting point, to see that these ideological ideas left kind of traces behind, like it was not mm-hmm. just like in the history books or in theory. It was something that you could actually see in a biological creature in a way, which was interesting. Yeah. And then the curiosity that sparked of thinking, okay, some of these projects in this vein continued over years, different ways, not associated exactly with the Nazis, but different things like, oh, why couldn't we do something like this? And then in the present, what was interesting was that the projects that were being carried out was about trying to work towards a rewilding of Europe, in a sort of ecological, keeping in mind like the climate change situation. How do we create nature spaces, and that in those spaces you need wild fauna, large mammals, and somehow this animal comes back into the story as a project, like, okay, how do we use, and then you have this thing of like, how do you use modern technology to bring them back?
Yeah, and I guess we have to say that like the projects are really not related. Like they want to really make sure that the rewilded Europe people don't want to be associated with that Nazi past. And that was, when we approached them, was also very important to them to really make clear that the objective behind it nowadays is very different. And as Juan said, like they want to create these wild zones, and then thinking about tourism, like eco tourists that can go there and experience this wild Europe, and you need, and also because these cattle, like nowadays, they're so domesticated that they can't survive in the wild, so that's why they have to think about recreating like this animal that survives without without being vaccinated and
and can like defend itself against predators and live in herds. But it's funny, so a whole different sort of currents of ideology then start coloring these new projects as opposed to the past projects. And this kind of change, like this difference, is what then became interesting to us, like seeing how these things get sort of worked through in the present.
And so you had mentioned a bit in the beginning about the starting point, but were kind of these histories the thing that kind of drew you to this project, or did you begin with the Auroch itself and then uncovered all of these things from there?
I think it was the animal. I mean, in a way, it was the fact that because we work with film and we work with the visual media, we were like, we read some article or we knew about it, and then it was the fact that these, you could go see them. For example, it's in the region where Anja comes from in Germany, that there's people that still have some herds of head cattle, and that was really the starting point. So in a way, like in the film,
actually the very last section you see of these animals there, and it's like this hand-developed role. This was actually our very first footage we shot.
Oh, okay.
And like the ending was in our journey, the beginning, and all the other stuff then is coming before in the editing. That's
kind of the film, and everything else is the prologue, because basically we had the footage of these animals, but then it was very clear once we had it that we couldn't just show you these. There's no context, there's nothing, because the animals, although they were created under these ideas, they don't speak about it. They don't have sort of, they're just cows in a way. That's all they are, and that's all we've ever been. So we're like, okay, now we have to kind of go back and really try to trace this whole story, and then that's how we ended up using like the book by Lutz Heck, and kind of trying to show these different levels of things moving over time until we get to this cows there standing there.
Right. Well, I think the film is really interesting to think about it as kind of like a catalog of different ways of attempting to render this animal, because we're seeing that this happens through various media. We're seeing this happening in the genetic labs. We're seeing this through drawing, through, your own photography camera, and also through this kind of model making sculptural object. I think it was the Dutch artist Marleen Filius who talks about how, you can't create this animal because it's gone, but the whole film is about different people kind of attempting to create this kind of mythical creature. And I was kind of interested in how this theme kind of follows through to the end, where we land at the tropical island resorts, which is also yet another example of humans trying to somehow recreate nature. I wondered if you could just speak to that.
I mean, for us, it was kind of clear from the beginning that it's that all these, it's just attempts, and there might be open to failure. So I think also in the way we approach this in filmmaking, there's often these failures within our own filmmaking that are kind of a metaphor also for this whole process. That's why, for example, we include this journey to tropical island, even though it was initially thought as of something else, but then it didn't really fit, but we still are going to show you and tell you about it, that it doesn't fit anymore, or the failed attempts of shooting at this at the lab in the Netherlands. It's like, so I think also the film in itself is trying to mirror all these like
the sort of impossible thing of having something that you can't see, you know, this kind of it was very interesting to us to meet the people that, for example, in the Netherlands, and from very early on they told us, yeah, we're not really actually trying to create a real Aurochs because we're very aware that's impossible. And in that sense, like, their position was in a way more humble than this Nazi position, where they basically said, yeah, we did it and it's done and okay. It was more like, we think we can use this technology to kind of approximate this kind of animal, what Marlene says. And then what was very interesting, or what happened sort of in the process, was seeing like all these different people trying to figure out, okay, but what was the animal? Like, what did it look like? How big is it? What is it? Where did it, you know, and then even when you say, I'm not trying to make the real one, but I'm trying to make a version of it, you still have to figure out what that version is.
Yeah, because also they existed in different regions and different times. They have different sizes, and it was just kind of a lot of guessing and what kind of representation.
And for us, it was kind of the same process of not knowing where we're going to end up, because it was all kind of following and meeting people along the way, like Marlene or Remy, who makes the model. We just met him when we went to visit the Tauros Foundation in the Netherlands. And they had this meeting about this model, but that was all accident. We didn't know that was going to happen. They just said, oh, these people are coming. You can sit in if you want. And then we were like listening to them. And they started talking about the model and brought out models. And they were talking about 3D printing and all this. And we're like, what was happening? And then it turns out that this museum was commissioning a model of the Aurochs for their own exhibition. And then we said, okay, this is we can use this because we don't have
Can we take it out into the wild first?
No, and like that is also comes from Remy, who built the model, because all the models he builds for museums, he takes them out before and photographs them in the, let's say, wild before delivering them, because he likes to put them in a natural place that is similar to what their habitat was, and photographs them. So that was also like an accident where we said, okay, if you're doing that, we'll come with you, and we want to see how this happens.
And actually this model building was really long. It almost took him a year to build it. So we kind of have to also come back and like postpone, keep pushing. We were like, no, we need to have this model, see that at the end. Yeah. So we were way above post any deadline. But so there were like a lot of accidents we stumbled into, and or coincidences that kind of mirrored very well what we were looking for.
And circling back to the tropical island resorts, I find it quite interesting how it also has a really kind of historically rich history, it was built by the Nazis, right? And then finally becomes a resort.
It was after the airfield then it was overtaken by the Russians. Then a company built the hangar.
Okay. So the space was the Nazis, but the hangar was not originally.
And it was so it's this convoluted story. Also, I mean, that was interesting to us, that the story of this place is kind of more interesting than like the fiction that we could build inside, because it also had all the layers of one after the other of this kind of European building on top of each other. So it was a Nazi airfield overtaken by the Red Army, by the Russians. Then it was given back to Germany after the unification. Then it was sold to a private German company that built that hangar because they wanted to build airships, the biggest airship in the world for shipping, but it was a failed project that never happened. And then this other tourism company then ends up buying that airship, that hangar, and saying. And
that company was from where?
It's an Asian company, right?
Yeah.
No, I forget. It's in the film, but too much information. But this company ends up buying it, and for some reason, it's interesting that they decide, of all things, we're going to build this tropical resort inside here. And we knew about this place before, kind of in the years that we've been working with the film. And yeah, like Anja said, at some point we said, oh, we should just go look at this place, shoot some footage and see what it actually is, just because in terms of this idea of like building this thing in an enclosed kind of bubble. And in the end, it kind of worked itself into the film.
Yeah, even though like we hated the footage at first, and we're like, what the heck do we just do? And so we put it aside for like 2-3 years, and then it kind of made sense then in the larger project to also this little.
But that footage was shot as part of this film, or kind of just footage you shot?
Yeah, I mean, like we're saying, the whole journey was kind of always going in different and trying to follow stuff. So we were just saying, okay, we need to, let's say, accumulate footage over time, which is kind of how we work with a lot of things. We just kind of build up footage and then see what fits where, if it doesn't or if not. In this case, we just did this trip, had this thing, and then eventually with the editing, when we kind of said, all right, let's stop shooting, like it kind of fit in there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because when we experienced it, it was quite like a cheesy touristy place. Like it just didn't feel like anything we thought it would be, or I don't know what we thought before, but so yeah, it then somehow worked.
Yeah, I was noticing rewatching the film again just now. Something I hadn't really quite stuck out to me previously was how images of other animals are kind of inserted throughout the film. There's the giraffe and the primates. I wondered if you could speak a bit about that.
Yeah, so these images are part of the book that we show you in the beginning of Lutz Heck, and so he photographed all these different animals. And when we got the book very in the beginning of our research, we were very intrigued by these very specific animal portraits. Some of them were like really seemed quite
constructed, like very artificial. This sort of kind of weird. It had, in a way, the way he was portraying these animals and taking these photographs, it was very kind of built in a way like sort of missing son of how he wanted these animals to look. And a lot of it is animals that they would go in, they would grab in Africa and other parts of the world to bring back to the zoos, and then became sort of these sort of pet animals with, first names like the gorilla or whatever that would be in these zoos for many decades. And that was kind of interesting to us that, this is in the book he writes which is called Animals, My Adventure. The Heck part is just a little chapter. And then there's a whole other story of all his trips to Africa and all these animals that they would capture and all these things. And also in the book, like the association with the Nazis or his friendship with Goering and all this stuff is never mentioned, it's kind of glossed over. And there's also this very kind of horrible scene of how the Berlin Zoo was bombed. And a lot of those animals were destroyed, they were killed. So that was also something that kind of was interesting to us of that it was not just one animal, it was this kind of whole project that had this kind of ideology behind it, this sort of point of what this natural world is.
Yeah. Finally, I wondered if you could speak about the sound design.
In particular.
Just like the music, I don't know. I found it really kind of evocative. Really creates this tone of this kind of historical, mythical space, and just where the different elements came from.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of intuitive, so it's hard to speak about it like in particular. I guess it's more or less during the editing, trying to build a sort of a sort of something that would give a little bit of union, like coherence to all the different parts, as we were shooting in like different countries, different areas, different time periods. So trying to find like something that would build. I mean, in the tropical islands, I guess it was really just to make this place feel like much more, in a way, grand, and also play against the images, which is really kind of like Anja was saying, it's not exactly like a nice place. It's very artificial, like extremely artificial. Everything is kind of made of like styrofoam, and then they have all these plants. I mean, it has this kind of thing where, and it has like pre-recorded sounds and things like that. So it was kind of trying to create a sort of experience of that you don't get if you're not there. If you get when you're there, but not through the film.
Well, I guess a lot of the sounds are also from like synths, like analog synths, like created. So actually, this is more. Yeah, I guess Juan is like building a lot of like small synths and then like making the different drones and stuff like that.
But all of the music or sounds you've produced yourselves.
Yeah. I mean, usually with all the stuff, we work with a sound designer and sound mixer, Christian Overbar, who's really great. We've worked with him since almost 10 years now.
He knows our films.
Yeah, he knows what
he
we
doesn't
want to
really
do.
question so much what we want.
Well, sometimes he's like, what is this? But we work with him then, and he knows how to mix 416 when we make print. So it's kind of that's like the big collaboration where we bring him a bunch of sounds, we bring him all this stuff, and then we kind of work like how
he
to
mixes it.
Yeah, how to like set it up that it kind of works with the film, and but that's just the sort of element that's there to kind of give it coherence, I guess.
Yeah, I think it works really beautifully. Well, thank you both so much for sharing this really incredibly rich and interesting film with our audiences. Any final thoughts you want to share, or?
I guess
thank you for inviting us.
For sharing the film. I hope people watch it and get something from it, and hopefully next time we can show something in person.
Yes, we'd love that. Thank you both so much.